Hello everyone. Today I'm talking about a topic that admittedly I've been harassed over, and it's something that people are extremely passionate about, for good reason, honestly, because this is by far the most controversial decision made in maybe competitive TF2 history. I of course am talking about the fact that an entire class was banned and remains banned to this day. Of course, for all you Madcap mains out there, you know I am, of course, referring to your favorite class. And yeah, admittedly, the title is a little bit clickbait because I am not going to be defending this ban at all because I think it is completely warranted. And I'm going to explain why. I'm going to talk about why the class is just so fundamentally broken, and why it's a good thing that Madcap is still banned to this day. So yeah, I guess I'll just talk about the class, talk about what it does, why it sort of encroaches on the roles of many different classes, kind of does everything. And now, of course, at first, and keep in mind, Madcap was banned back when, in the infancy of sixes. It was I don't remember the year exactly, but around 2009. It was banned very early. And there was a small period of time in which Class Limit 1 was tested for it, but that did not last particularly long. And yeah, so we'll just talk about the class, talk about why it's just so fundamentally broken. And I suppose we may as well just talk about the weapons and the class stats in general. So for starters, just basic fundamentals of the class. Madcap's fast, second fastest class in the game, slower than a scout, but still very fast. And of course, what makes a class good, generally speaking, is usually mobility and versatility and damage output, things like that. And of course, Madcap is in no shortage of any of those. So being the second fastest class is of course nice, but that is not even close to where the mobility ends, and we will get to that soon, don't you worry. So second fastest class, very nice. Now, of course, Madcap was banned before medic scout speed became a thing, so a medic beaming a Madcap would not be moving faster, but it honestly doesn't matter a whole lot for the purposes of the class. But anyway, yeah. Now, despite being very fast, slower than Scout, but still fast nonetheless, Madcap is healthier. 150 base HP is kind of annoying to deal with, to be honest, because with a buff, suddenly you're crossing way more damage thresholds than a Scout would be. Because remember, a buffed 150 HP class, like a Madcap or a Medic, is 225 HP, meaning that 2 meat shots or 2 big rockets, 2 pipes, none of those kill anymore. So you are crossing valuable damage thresholds with a buff just because of that extra 25 base HP, which is a big deal. And of course, it makes it so that a class that is fast is also kind of tanky as well, which, again, part of the reason why this class is just so good at everything. So anyway, yeah, those are the basic stats, I suppose. Now, of course, no double jump like a Scout, but again, we'll talk about the mobility later. Okay, so for the weapons, I guess we'll start off by talking about the melee, because this is one of the most baffling decisions by Valve I can think of, to be honest. Because literally every single class in the game, now of course the melees have different stats, kind of, in the sense that Spies is of course unique. I guess Engineer has some unique interactions, but the damage stuff is all the same. And Scout, of course, is unique, and then it does less damage. So there are mild differences in the damage output and whatnot. Of course, Spy being the most unique, but still, they're all pretty basic. It's just a melee weapon that does 65 damage in the majority of cases. Now, of course, Madcap does do 65 damage, but it has a unique interaction, which is that you pull it out and suddenly you have Scout capping speed for some reason. Because, I genuinely don't understand. Because already, it's a fast class, so you're sort of encroaching on Scout's niche there. But the fact that you can introduce bigger cap time, like a Scout would, when you want to, is a huge deal. Because a lot of the time as well, the fact that a scout can cap twice as fast, it doesn't matter so much that that's passive. Like in the case of, for example, on a mid-fight, one team wins the mid-fight confidently enough that they have kills that they can immediately push into second with. Well, you're still going to need to spend the time to cap mid, and in those cases, it makes a lot of sense to just leave a flank scout to cap, right? Because it's the fastest class at doing so. Now, actually, interestingly enough, you do see some teams. It's not really like so much of a common thing, but I think it should be more popular, to be honest. You have teams with a soldier on pain train, and your soldier can stay on mid while a scout goes forward. Because, to be honest, having a second scout for like a medic chase is really nice. So there's definitely value there. But again, a Madcap is just going to be able to pull out their stock melee and just do the role that a scout would, or that a soldier needed an unlock to do. Because keep in mind, this class got banned before there were really any unlocks. So yeah. Okay. So yeah, there's that. Just weird melee interactions, encroaching on scout's role, making it just giving it kind of unneeded utility, and making it good at playing the objective. Now, it isn't strictly like a scout, because of course, you know, a scout that can get ×2 cap time while fighting people is quite valuable. Don't get me wrong. Like for a last push or something like that, you want to be able to clear stickies, shoot a soldier bombing you while you're capping on last and things like that. That's not something a Madcap could do while still getting the ×2 cap, but still, it's good enough that it's worth mentioning. And again, this is your stock melee we're talking about. Why does a stock melee have stats like this? But that's probably the least offensive part of the class. And this is where we are going to talk about the secondary. Now, of course, for anyone who's played TF2, or really talked about the game much at all, you know of its Quake inspirations. This class is heavily inspired by, I mean, it started out as a mod for Quake, right? And you can see that in the design of many of the weapons. For example, soldiers' rocket launchers, any of the shotguns, grenades, and of course, Madcap has not one, but two basically Quake ripoff weapons, but they are changed in ways that, man, it's just so BS. So for starters, the secondary. Now, Scout has, and I keep making comparisons to Scout because it does encroach on Scout's role a lot, right? Madcap and Scout are pretty similar classes, but Madcap is arguably better. Honestly, teams would probably still want to use a Pocket Scout because it's hard to say, actually. Whatever. Let's just talk about the secondary. So, oh no, we were talking about Scout. So Scout, you have a shotgun and you have a pistol. Your shotgun is your main damage dealer. That's where you're chunking people's healths, and pistol is kind of your cleanup weapon. And this does resemble sort of the lightning gun in Quake. However, Madcap has an actual lightning gun as a secondary. Functions basically the same. Has really nasty damage ramp up in close ranges. So this class can just melt health bars close range, which is really potent, of course. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is arguably the fact that with consecutive hits, so you get 3 ticks in a row, and keep in mind, lightning gun, this thing fires fast, so 3 ticks is not hard to get, and especially against slower classes, it's pretty consistent, and you can get these 3 ticks repeatedly as well. So with 3 ticks, you apply a stacking, it's effectively a bleed. It's not like considered, like the effect is like getting shocked, right? But it functions basically like a bleed, except for some very important interactions, namely the fact that unlike bleed damage, or afterburn for that matter, in which you get a health pack and it is effectively cleansed from you, or that effect is no longer being applied, no, it will keep ticking for its full duration. So a health pack might not necessarily even save you in those situations. And again, this is stacking as well, meaning you are, for example, a heavy trying to hold last, pretty standard situation, very strong defensive off-class holding last point. Well, if a Madcap is in this Uber and they get like 5 of these stacks on you in the lightning gun, which is not even hard to do either, because this is a full Uber. Like, if you actually use the full duration of the Uber on this heavy, then you could easily apply like 15 stacks, and that heavy would be taking like half their health for damage every tick of that shock damage, which is just unbelievable, right? And it just completely annihilates these slower, kind of fatter classes. It's just insane. So yeah, the fact that you can't even cleanse it with a pack is horrible. Now, it almost seemed like a bug at first, and this is what I thought for the longest time, but years have passed and it hasn't changed at all. And in fact, even with the recent, well, not even recent at all, but I think it was Meet Your Match, some update made Mediguns reduce the time of those damage over time effects, such as bleed damage or afterburn. And maybe Cloak, I think Cloak does it as well. Cloak does it for like Girardi and Milk, I know. Probably bleed and afterburn as well. But nonetheless, when those lingering effects started getting reduced by the Medi Beam, it doesn't apply to the Lightning Gun. So really the only conclusion you can make is that it's intentional. Why? I couldn't tell you. But again, what this actually means in a sixes context is pretty nasty, because for starters, obviously dealing with damage over times is just it feels bad to fight against. I know people who play against Madcaps casually, as well as pretty similar to Pyro as well. Pyro can be just really annoying to play against because sometimes you just burn out and there's not much you could do about it, and it leads to a lot of trades that just don't feel that deserved for the Pyro or the Madcap player. And yeah, it's just not very fun to fight against at all. And fun is a consideration. I mean, if you're playing a video game, you want it to be fun. So yeah, but in a specifically sixes context, this means that if you have a Madcap playing kind of like a flank scout role, playing on the flank, for those flank fights, a lot of the time, if you would otherwise win the fight, it actually just turns into a trade, which you're taking a risk for what ends up being usually a neutral interaction, which generally just isn't worth it, right? If you're taking a risk of shoving the flank in engaging in a 1v1 or a 2v1 or something like that, or a 2v2, you want some good expected reward if you actually win that fight. But the fact that a lot of the time you're really only expecting to trade out means that you're taking a risk of just dying and not getting any kills at all for only the expected reward of a trade, which just isn't worth it. And yeah, it's brutal for those flank fights, as well as just melting through players. On top of the fact that, again, it has good close range ramp up, so it is just a good weapon in and of itself without that damage over time, shock damage, which a lot of fights you don't even really notice that much. Yes, it does like extra 30-ish damage for just a normal close range 1v1, which does matter. It'll cross over some thresholds, but it doesn't. The actual direct damage from the weapon itself is what's killing the opponent, basically. So it's a good weapon in and of itself. And also, again, on the topic of kind of crossing over into the roles of a scout, it's really good at denying bombs. Meaning, yet again, not only is this class good just in its own merits, but because it does so many things that other classes can do, the opportunity cost of running it is so much lower. Because if you switch a flank scout to a Madcap, just in the two weapons we've talked about already, you don't really lose much as far as having a player stay behind to cap a point is concerned. You really lose nothing at all in that regard. And you don't lose much in the way of denying soldier bombs, both of which are really valuable things for a flank scout to do. And being able to have such a powerful class that doesn't even really have a trade-off in that regard, obviously powerful, and probably too powerful. So yeah, Lightning Gun, just such an annoying weapon to play against. It's one of the reasons that I just don't even... Man, when there's like just Madcap players in like the Uncle Topia pub I'm playing or something like that, it's just so much less fun playing against that. Because, like, what is the counterplay? I guess you just play the range. But the range is kind of far as well. Like, if you're on a process mid, playing height, which is a very normal place for you to be playing as a Madcap, then you're able to hit players on the other side of height. Now, granted, there's going to be some damage fall off from that range, but you're still peppering them. It's definitely more consistent than the pistol because it doesn't have that random spread, and just attacks so much faster. So yeah, it's just a horrible weapon. I don't know why it's designed that way. But that is not even the worst part. Did I actually get that for real now? Or was that just a fictional thing? I did. Interesting. I'm going to get rid of that. So, right. Now on to the primary. And this is where things really go off the rails. Because if you remember earlier, I talked about how Madcap had not one, but two heavily Quake-inspired weapons. We've talked about the lightning gun secondary, and now we're going to talk about the plasma gun primary. Now, for those of you who might not play TF2 or haven't played Quake, plasma gun, basically very rapid fire projectile weapon that projectiles just go in a straight line, basically. And so in Quake, it's just a nice spam tool. And of course, spam, as you all know, is pretty strong in sixes as well for holding doors and things like that. But the plasma gun for Madcap has maybe the most bizarre choice I've ever heard of, in the fact that, kind of like the crossbow that would come later, the plasma gun has reverse damage fall off, meaning it does less damage in close range and more damage. The damage ramps up the further you are, which is so dumb, because then you just have a completely uninteractive long-range spam tool that's hard to dodge. Admitted, like, the projectiles go pretty fast. Now, admittedly, if you're long range, you're not going to... It's easier to dodge projectiles from long range than close range. That much is obvious, right? However, because it fires so fast, because you can kind of just put a wall of these plasma balls, it becomes so much harder to dodge. And even if you're taking one or two hits, like, a hit is doing like 25 damage from range, right? Meaning that a couple of hits and suddenly your medic has taken 50 damage. They're very forcible to a bomb. If your med gets unlucky and takes like 4 hits, that's 100 damage they might just have to force. And all this from range, right? Meaning the Madcap is basically completely safe in this situation, which is brutal. And you think in, for example, a disad situation in which a team is trying to push a point with uber advantage. A lot of the time in the modern metagame, you'll see a team run sniper defensively because you're expecting the other team to push. You can just set up a sniper on a long sight line and scope up and just have them get that med drop if the other team doesn't spot adequately or something like that. And that is a strong strategy. But there's still counterplay. Honestly, the main counterplay tends to be just using your Uber, and a lot of teams will just pop in a situation like that. But if you really do want to dry push and not have to use, then by all means, you can have a soldier bomb that sniper and just trade out very easily. Now, it's easy to imagine that this is definitely not the case with a Madcap, because yes, it's not as threatening as a sniper. But on those long sight lines, it's really hard to get through a door, like, for example, process choke, if they're just on that long sight line, which can be really nasty. And the counterplay of just bombing a soldier into them absolutely does not work, because if you remember from earlier, talking about the lightning gun, Madcap is a fantastic class at denying bombs, meaning you're sending your soldier into a 1v1 they're not going to win, unlike against a sniper, which they're very favored to win. Which is so stupid. So there's very little you can do about that other than maybe pick a different door if you have that much ad, and a lot of the time that's just not going to work at all. But your main counterplay is just going to be popping. So you're almost, in a lot of these points that have bad plasma gun sightlines, you're kind of forced to pop through rather than dry push, and that just limits your choices as the attacking team. It narrows the kind of game states down. It flattens the gameplay. It makes things a lot less interesting, etc., etc. All contained in a class that you're running full-time anyway, meaning you can do this all the time. If you're trying to do a spy play, for example, or use that sniper as we talked about earlier, any of these examples, you need to anticipate that game state, which takes skill and takes... what's the word I'm looking for? It takes skill, it takes game sense is the word I was looking for, to understand that's what the situation is going to look like by the time you can actually establish that class in that position. And things can go wrong with that. But a Madcap, you just have them anyway, so it's just no risk whatsoever. Right. Now, that's the sort of offensive potency of this gun. Just long-range spam that's difficult to dodge, because even controversial weapons like the lock and load, for example, which is long-range, high-damage spam, is so much easier to deal with than the plasma gun, because it's just... you can't shoot the pipes that fast. You can shoot so fast with the plasma gun that someone is gonna get tagged. Now, granted, each individual hit does a lot less than a pipe would, but it still adds up, and it's really not uncommon at all to see a Madcap, if not top damage, get like second most damage, easily breaking 300 each half just out of that long range spam, just tagging people for 25 so consistently during these team fights. It's really, really brutal. So again, a class that is just kind of good at everything in an unfair way. And that's not even talking about the last part, the mobility of the class. We already talked about how it's the second fastest class in the game, but that doesn't even scratch the surface of what the plasma gun actually enables the class to do, because it does have a very mild splash damage radius. Now, in combat, this isn't something you're going to notice all that often, to be honest. Sometimes you're going to get hit with splash damage from it and take, maybe 15 damage rather than the normal 25 from a long-range direct. Sure. But the fact that this is splash damage means that you can do knockback. And considering the fact that you have that reverse damage fall off as well, means that in close ranges, you can do very low damage knockback to yourself. Meaning that a Madcap can climb a wall with the plasma gun. In many cases, you can just straight up bomb off a wall. It's almost like a beggar's, actually. How you load up all those rockets and then go flying off the wall. Obviously a lot less powerful than a beggar's, but if the wall is high enough, then by all means you can be just climbing up it and perpetually gaining speed for just a regular bomb. Now, of course, this isn't a class you're going to want to be bombing in with like a soldier, because you just don't have access to splash damage like rockets or things like that. So it's not really, you don't want to be bombing like that. But it's still quite useful for bombing over a team that's getting through a choke, getting a timing to go behind, but just general mobility. Because any high ground that is accessible to, for example, a scout is even more accessible to a Madcap, because you can just climb even further. Let's think of some examples. So Batman above choke on Metalworks. That is a position that a scout just can't get into without Boston Basher jumping. And even then, it's pretty hard to do with the Boston Basher. And you're taking so much more self-damage to do it. Very easy for a Madcap to just zip up that wall and be up there. What are some other good examples? I mean, any like hiding spot on Gully Wash. Gully Wash second and mid both have hiding spots like above choke or the lamp on mid, any of the windows, things like that. These are all very accessible spots for a Madcap that in the case of, for example, a lamp on mid, not very accessible to a scout at all. So you have a similar access to mobility as a soldier, to be honest. Soldier, of course, is a more mobile class, and this is something that you kind of see in general, is Madcap is sort of the jack of all trades as far as like mobility, health, speed, damage output is concerned. All of these things the class is quite good at, but not better than the specialists for those things. It's not going to be as mobile in a ground fight as a scout would be, and it's not going to be as mobile in a macro sense as a soldier would be. It's not going to have the same damage output as a demo would be. or would have. But it's so close in all of these regards that it almost seems like there's no trade-offs, which is why the class is just so broken. And ignoring the fact that the plasma gun can wall climb, if you're really, really good with this thing, then you can almost like slide across the floor to some extent. If you have some speed going, then you can be shooting on the floor and getting just enough knockback to be propelling yourself high enough for the next shot. And you can kind of skate across the ground in that regard, which of course pretty difficult to do in an actual fight setting, because you just get knocked around a little bit. It's going to throw things off enough to where that's no longer going to work. But barring that, like for rollouts and things like that, you're very fast, almost competing with a soldier if you're good enough at it. Again, this is really hard to do. Soldier rollouts and demo rollouts are generally speaking way easier than like a Madcap floor rollout or things like that. But still, the ceiling is there, and the class is just so unbelievably mobile. So there's just a lot going on in the class that just makes it so fundamentally broken. And this is without talking about any of the unlocks that would come in the years later. I'm not going to go over those. I think even just with stock weapons, the class is just so fundamentally broken because, again, as I mentioned earlier, there just aren't trade-offs being made. You have so much potency offensively. You're able to deny bombs. You're able to long-range spam. You're not the best at holding doors, I'll say. You don't have reliable splash damage like a soldier or a demo. That's really your only downside. But those are really the only two classes that have that. I guess an engineer is good at holding doors, kind of, in that sense, but not with splash damage, not in the same way. But yeah, those are your only two classes with that that capability. There's just so many. There's so much power in Madcap that, without any reasonable trade-offs, you're healthy enough. You're fast enough. You're really fast, actually. You are mobile, very mobile, in fact. And in a fight setting as well, you're mobile enough. You don't have access to that double jump, things like that. But still, I think it's completely justified that Madcap was banned, and it will stay banned. And that's a good thing. I know that there's salty Madcap players that just want me to talk about the class all the time. I understand the that it might not be very rewarding to have, or rewarding's not the right word. I understand that when people are upset that their favorite class is banned in a competitive setting, right? The class that you main, you just can't play at all. And that could be frustrating, but like, come on, man. Like, you know how good this class is. You understand that you can kind of do everything. So why is it? You should at least be expecting it, right? But anyway, I think that's all I have to talk about. Maybe the most controversial ban in sixes, kind of explaining why Madcap is just such a broken class. A class that even Highlander doesn't play with. And Highlander is like conceived as the format where every class is played all the time, and even they can't deal with it, which really should just go to show just how broken the class is fundamentally. But anyway, hope you all enjoyed. Hope you guys learned something. Hopefully all the Madcap players can finally stop talking about that horrible class in my comments, and I finally addressed it. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time.